Hi folks, Gheeotine here. Just a quick update before I get to the review. I did give away that Dear Esther code. It's to this commenter from the last video, and if you want to be entered for more codes in future, just make sure you comment when I offer them. Alright, let's get started. I'm playing something almost every week, and sometimes I want to talk about it. It's time for a quick hit review. Or a vertical slice, if you will. So stick with me for some lightning reviews. This week, on the chopping block. This past week, I've been playing Chernobylite. Actually, I've been playing several games, but this is the first one that I was able to sink my teeth into. I tried playing Kingdom Hearts 3, but I found that the game's story and mechanics were completely getting away from itself, and I couldn't stomach more than 4 hours. By the way, you can consider this my Kingdom Hearts 3 review as well. Anyway, back to Chernobylite. The very start of the game's narrative is somewhat disjointed and is constantly throwing information at you. Eventually, things settle down and you start to unravel the tangled Christmas lights that make up the introductory exposition dumps. You play as Igor, a scientist from the former Chernobyl nuclear power plant who is attempting to return to the complex to find his lost wife who disappeared in some kind of distortion when the disaster struck. During the initial operation, things go south and you encounter a mysterious superhuman with the ability to open wormholes. He shoots one of your allies dead, grievously wounds another, and is about to finish you off when you use your secret weapon, your own wormhole generator, which is powered by a mysterious element created by the anomalies taking place at the former reactor, the game's namesake, Chernobylite. Having made your escape, you and your remaining allies set up an operating base to set out on missions in order to make another go at figuring out what happened to your wife. Now, the story from what I've given so far may seem fairly simple and straightforward, but trust me when I say that some parts later in the game go completely off its rocker, but not in a bad way. Taking place in the former Soviet Union, of course the game is laced with espionage, corporate interests, love triangles, and just a little bit of war crime. The gameplay is very reminiscent of titles like Metro Exodus or Stalker, and the game's best parts are revealed once you are dropped in the first open world level. I don't speak with exaggeration when I say that the atmosphere that this title builds is oppressive, tense, and completely immersive. You have to be constantly on your toes and aware of your surroundings, or else you will very quickly get wrecked by military contractors, radioactive humanoid monstrosities, and those aren't even accounting for the supernatural encounters that left me genuinely chilled at the very start. Fortunately, as long as you stick to the high brush, the stealth mechanics are fairly forgiving. I believe that this is an excellent means of storytelling and characterization. You are a scientist, not a one-man army, and the game rewards you for careful evaluation of your surroundings. My first combat scenario was quickly met with death, and early on you learn that combat is often not worth the limited necessary resources or the danger to yourself. Even successfully engaging in combat in the first hours of the game has penalties. In addition to having to monitor your health and radiation levels, you also have a bar that monitors your current mental health, and as one would expect of a scientist, killing an opponent does heavy damage to your psyche, which again takes resources and time to rectify. In fact, let's talk about that. In the early campaign, you have very few helpful items such as healing items or weapons. Even if you take down one of the armed guards patrolling the wasteland, their weapons are biometrically locked, meaning you can't use them, and you will likely only get a pittance of bullets out of each one. You eventually get to the ability to craft not only these necessary consumables, but weapons and even fabricators for your operating base. But this turns into a balancing act, which requires more resources to manage because, as one would expect, heavy industrial tools require power and can make an area inhospitable due to waste or other side effects, which don't only affect you and your one ally. Throughout the game, you can encounter other survivors and recruit them to assist you in the final mission, and you don't just have to make them like you, but also keep them healthy. Actually, there's a good chance that at least 2 allies will hate you by the end because in almost every level, there will be some decision that you will have to make, and given all the motivations swirling around, the most you can hope for is to maintain neutrality with everyone. I even lost an ally in the middle of my playthrough, and he was gone forever. Although that was just because I kept pissing him off. I could also theoretically lose team members through management of resources. You see, each and every day, you have to give out food rations and manage other supplies as needed, including for yourself. So you get into the act of scavenging levels quite thoroughly in order to try and make sure you and your team have enough to get by. Each day there are multiple objectives, including the main story campaign missions. In theory, you could send an ally to do a main story quest, but they usually have a lower percentage chance of success. If you experience enough mission failures, mismanage resources, or don't tend to your team when needed, then you will find yourself in a very tough situation, especially because resources that occur naturally can become very scarce. This goes even farther to build that oppressive atmosphere that I relished in the early hours of the game. However, that feeling does not last forever. Because I was so desperate to maintain resources and build a base that was able to meet my team's needs, I put a lot of early resources into gardens and resource production, and by the latter part of the game, rarely had to worry about anything. Additionally, as you level up and gain more abilities in combat, the world becomes far less oppressive. Don't get me wrong, if you rush in carelessly, you will get your shit rocked. But you will gain enough power where you can usually rectify a situation that would have otherwise been irreversible. Lastly is the story. I'm not going to bother with significant spoilers, so no warnings should be necessary. From what I was able to gather, Igor gains information on his missions in order to put together a VR simulation of the incidents that led up to his wife's disappearance. These segments come across as walking simulator bits with exposition dumps laden with jargon. They go on way too long, and I wasn't able to just passively listen, considering the best language option was with the Russian dub and English subtitles. Other key points include moments where significant decisions were made with my allies. I was genuinely shocked when I eventually came across a wormhole that I was able to generate that would effectively allow me to go back and redo any choice I made that I might be having second guesses about. And the world would adapt and pretend I'd made that choice all along. It starts to introduce alternate dimension meta-narratives, and I was quite thrown by it. Especially with one instance at the end that, again, I said I wouldn't spoil. Lastly, I want to touch on something that's not necessarily a gripe, but something that I kept coming back to in my thought processes while I played. This game stretches finite resources to the near breaking point. What I mean is the developers were able to implement many impressive things better than some AAA titles I've seen, but if you look closely, you can see areas where they glossed over to focus on other important elements. Every single character in the game has a mask obscuring their face in order to save on animation. Text boxes with faces represent the dialogue exchanges. Many assets are clearly bought from a game engine asset store, but they're so intelligently used that you would never notice unless you're looking for it. The only downside is that there were occasional glitches and crashes that sent me back to the main menu. Nothing at a crucial moment that would have severely soured my experience, but it's worth noting that they did happen enough for me to take note. In conclusion, Chernobyl was an oppressive, immersive, and thoroughly engaging experience at the very start. By the time I got enough power to neuter the tension, the story had me gripped enough to see it through to the end. Many elements of the game are very intelligently designed and shows that the developers at the Farm 51 Games stretched their budget as far as they absolutely could. It could have used a little bit more polish and some focus on balancing in order to maintain tension, but I recommend anyone that enjoyed any of the Stalker or Metro series should get this game immediately. Anyone that wants a power fantasy or a simple, straightforward narrative experience you only need to half pay attention to should look elsewhere.
Перестань хвататься за невозможное.